In Easter, as we gather here in Australia and New Zealand and celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, there's millions of Christians around the world that gather at great risk to their safety.
Yeah, they can't meet in churches, they worship in secret places. And yet, they are some of the most bold evangelists you'll ever meet. They unashamedly share the gospel no matter the cost.
My name is Gabe and this is Joss. We have the privilege of working for Open Doors and we get to host this live stream where you're about to hear more about the persecuted church from our field workers directly. Now, the message of the persecuted church can be overwhelming, but what we find is that it is one of the most hope-filled places on the planet.
Yeah, it really is. And we're so excited for this live stream today. This is the first time that we've done anything like this. So if you're tuning in, please comment below, tell us where you're listening from, all of that kind of thing. We're so grateful that you've joined us today. But today is all about One With Them, which is a campaign that we put on every Easter in response to the increased persecution that happens to believers all over the world during this Christian holiday. So what we're asking people to do is to give 1 day's wage to the persecuted church, to draw a cross on your wrist and to share it on social media. So you'll hear more and more about that throughout this live stream.
Yeah, so I just want to share a quick story with you from the field. It was 3 years ago, on March 27th, where a suicide bomber killed 75 people and more than 300 people were injured. This happened at a church service in Pakistan. Now, a woman from that church told us this: "We celebrate Easter knowing that at any time a suicide bomber can come and disrupt our service, our worship, and our praying. But then I think, will it really be disrupted, or will I be sent into the fullness of worship?" Now, it's these stories and these Christians that we get to serve at Open Doors, and you get the chance today to stand one with our brothers and sisters around Easter time where persecution increases.
Yeah. So we are really, really excited for today. We're just about to introduce you to some people who will be doing an interview. Tim, one of our colleagues here in Australia, is an excellent communicator. He is well-travelled and he's a brilliant storyteller. He will be interviewing Jo, who is our Field Communications Manager for the Sub-Saharan region of Africa. She has been working with the ministry for many, many years, and we're really excited to have her here today. But before we get to that, please check out this video of our ambassadors, some of our friends who have decided to stand one with them.
Hi everybody, this is Mark and Darlene Check. We are thrilled to be serving as ambassadors for Open Doors and their One With Them campaign.
Each day, Christians all over the world face persecution for their faith in Jesus.
Every Easter, while Australian and New Zealand churches are preparing for Good Friday and Easter Sunday, some of our brothers and sisters around the globe face increased persecution. They're physically attacked as they come together to celebrate these 2 days.
We are one family across the world. We have one hope, one faith, one Lord Jesus. But these persecuted Christians are often alone, marginalised, and very lonely.
But despite their suffering, the church is continuing to grow. This is your opportunity to practically support those who suffer for following Jesus.
This Easter, will you join us and give 1 day's wage to strengthen the global body of Christ?
I personally can't think of a more practical way that we can actually fulfill the words that Jesus so clearly taught us to live, and the way to follow him by helping these people, by standing one with them. And what we're practically asking and going to be a part of is donating 1 day's salary on Wednesday the 17th of April. And so we'd love you to be a part of it. We don't want you to miss out in helping these people. And so you can head to onewiththem.org and be a part of all that God's doing and help these persecuted Christians.
Here today with Jo. Jo, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thanks you for
Tim.
taking your time out and spending time with us. So you're the communicator for everything in the sub-Saharan African region for Open Doors. What made you so passionate about the ministry that you wanted to take that on?
Well, Tim, when I finished university, the Lord gave me the opportunity to work with the persecuted church through Open Doors. And I'm so thankful that he did, because I learned so much as a young Christian from my work with the persecuted church and through Open Doors. And then there was a time when I stepped away And during that time, I felt really robbed. I felt really poor in my own spiritual walk. It felt like I had lost a limb, an arm or a leg. I really needed the message of the persecuted church and the lessons from the persecuted church in my life. So the first opportunity I got to come back, I took. So yeah, it's many years ago, and yeah, it's still a privilege every day to work with the persecuted church. I'm so thankful.
That's fantastic, and I love that imagery of the persecuted church. We talk about it all the time. It's our brothers and sisters in Christ,
Absolutely.
and we're part of that body together. Joe, working across such a massive area, are there any things which are recurring, any kind of patterns where you see this is the common cause of persecution?
Right, it's really a mixed bag of situations for the Christians in sub-Saharan Africa, Tim. It's, on the one hand, we have radicalism or extremism, and they kind of affect the church through groups like Boko Haram that people would have heard about, or Al-Shabaab. So there's a lot of violence that's associated with that, a lot of displacements of Christian, the effort to remove them from areas to occupy. But then there's also hostile governments, authoritarian governments like in Sudan or in Eritrea, where there's a lot of hostility against the church, and they're not allowed to have normal worship, they're not allowed to gather, they're not allowed to share the gospel, they're not even allowed to carry Bibles in some areas. And then there's also tribal systems where there's a lot of pressure on Christians when they turn their backs on the beliefs of their parents, maybe the rituals, ancestral worship, those sorts of things. And then when they choose Christ, they are rejected by the community out of anger or out of fear also for the revenge from the gods. So these Christians are then in very difficult situations trying to make a living in communities where they really need the wider society to make a living. So it really is a mixture of things that Christians are faced with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that last one sounds particularly maybe more relevant to Africa than other areas. So with that kind of tribal belief, what does that look like for an individual who's been ostracized from their community?
I've recently done a story that was so encouraging for me. There was a young woman in East Africa that was part of a very extensive tribal worship situation. She grew up in this system. She was very passionate about it. She was absolutely sold out to their family God. But she lived next door to Christians who would constantly sing this hymn, and she tried everything to avoid it. She put stuff in her ears and would cover her head when she was in bed not to hear them sing the hymn. But somehow that hymn found its way into her heart, and one day when she was worshipping with her family, this family God, the words of this hymn came out, and she was greatly shocked. And she asked the priest, please do something to get rid of, there's a spell on me, break the spell. And nothing would work. Eventually she ended up going to church and then got saved. And the moment her family found out about it, they rejected her, and she was only in her teenage years. So she had to find another place to stay. She had to find a way to make a living, which maybe in our society sounds quite doable for a young woman, but in her society it's very difficult for young women to survive on their own. And thankfully she was taken in by a Christian family. She worked for this family and they gave her lodging and food. And she was discipled and became well-rooted in the Word of God. And today she's one of the most prolific evangelists in East Africa. She's planted several churches in very hostile areas where very few people dare to go. And she's been sharing the gospel with such courage, in that area. So even though it was really difficult for her, she's become an evangelist and she's pushed through.
It's incredible that she's gone from such a vulnerable and difficult position to planting churches. That's
Exactly,
incredible.
yeah.
And amazing
Very
how God
encouraging.
prepares people for those things too.
Yeah.
So a country that we often see coming up in the media in Australia and in our own work overseas is Nigeria. Why is Nigeria the one that seems to keep cropping up?
Oh, the persecution situation in Nigeria is really complex. It's a very difficult situation for the Christians. In the south of the country, there is respect for religious freedom. It's a Christian-dominated society, but in the north of the country is Muslim-dominated, and the Christians face a variety of challenges there. There are 12 states that have implemented Sharia or Islamic law, And in those countries, in those areas, Christians face a lot of discrimination. They're a small minority in those areas, so usually their village would be very isolated, they would be the last to benefit from any kind of development from the government, like clinics, education, water wells. So those communities really struggle. Then in the northeast, as we mentioned, there's Boko Haram attacks, violence, although it's not on the scale it used to be, but there are still attacks against the Christians. And there Christians face a lot of displacement, destruction of their properties, lots of trauma going on there. Then in the Middle Belt, which is basically the core of Christian presence in the north, there's been a lot of attacks against Christian communities from Muslim Fulani militants. It's a very complex situation, and although it is true that some of these attacks can be connected to limited resources, it's also a little bit more complex than that. The Fulani are a people group that is across West Africa. They're a nomadic group. They move with their cattle across many parts of West Africa. But in the Middle Belt is the area where we see that there's been brutal attacks against Christians. And the Christians there believe that it's really part of a concerted effort to lift them out of this area. They're a very prominent presence there. They're very prolific with the evangelism as well. They share the gospel. The church has been growing in this area. So they feel that this is a very concerted effort to remove them from the area. And you have to ask, why is this only a problem in this area? Mm-hmm. And of course, it is very complex. There's a lot of different factors that contribute to the problem, but there definitely also is a religious aspect to it, which is a great concern to us.
Mm. So entire Christian communities being targeted in this area, is that the scale?
Correct. Yeah. That's correct, yes. And, unfortunately, this is a very desperate situation. The way it affects people personally is just so tragic. I mean, whole communities are being wiped out. Christians are being attacked with impunity. And I can just share maybe two stories of believers who, have been to show, how this affects people personally. There's one lady called Aisha. She's in her 20s, mother of 3, who 2 years ago lived with her husband in a village, and their village was attacked in the middle of the night. And when they attacked, they forced their way into their house. They took her husband away, and she assumed that she will never see him again. And 10 of the attackers stayed behind in her house and demanded sex. And when she refused, 2 of them raped her. Now, this is the kind of thing that happens not just to Aisha, it happens to many others. You can imagine the impact that has on someone's life, the trauma that they carry with them, the guilt, it's just such a complex injury that is done to people. There's another young man, his name is Gyang. He lost his entire family in one night. He was spared because he wasn't there, and he heard about this attack and about the death of his family on Facebook. And when he got there, he found to his horror that his entire family had been wiped out. And this is the kind of stories we hear over and over again, and it's really tragic. And I think it's just important to remember that when we speak about these figures, when we speak about, the different aspects of persecution, it's very often easy to forget that it affects people like you and me, on a very personal level. People with the same aspirations, people with the same hopes. They want to live in security. They want to advance in life, and it's taken from them through this violence. And these are the kinds of people that we want to stand with, and that we want to associate with.
So how does the church respond to these things? What is the church doing in these communities at the moment?
It's very difficult for the church to manage, on their own. There are very brave pastors out there that I really have the greatest respect for. But there are places, where it's very difficult for them to cope, and where we need to stand alongside them with emergency relief. We need to help them, come back on their feet again, rebuild villages where it's possible. And the church in that particular area, I'm always encouraged to hear their testimony and their desire to be present in those circumstances. They don't want to leave. They don't want to be anywhere else. These are their homes. It's their farms. It's where they grow up. But apart from that, they feel really called to remain present there, to interact with people in a loving way. But we are concerned, about the long-term effect on communities. We really need to preserve the presence of the church in the Middle Belt. And that's why it's so important for us to keep journeying with them and to go forward with them and help them when they are able and willing to stay in those areas. We should just be right beside them, helping them to do that. Because their presence there is so important.
Yeah, well, how is Open Doors enabling that to happen?
Well, we do a lot of trauma care. We do a lot of emergency kind of help. But we also want to equip people to be able to do evangelism, to be able to offer the hope that they have, an answer to the hope that they have. So we want to equip people to be able to share the gospel. We also help them to view their persecution from a biblical perspective. So we help them a lot with those sorts of support, So it's spiritual support, it's practical support. Whatever the situation demands, really, but we do a lot of trauma care at the moment, which has amazing results, but we need lots more of it. So, there's the need far outweighs what we're able to do right now.
Absolutely, and this is just in Nigeria. So what about if we turned our attention to another area, say East Africa?
Right.
Are there any specific parts which really need care to the same extent?
Oh, right, yeah. The church in the Horn of Africa, specifically East Africa, like Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, parts of Kenya, those areas really, the church are in so many, they're challenged by so many different situations, like same as in Nigeria, there are violence against them from groups like Al-Shabaab. There's also a group in the Democratic Republic of the Congo that are spreading and that's causing a lot of destruction. So we have similar challenges there. But then it's also just, ideologies and government who make it very difficult for the church. But the church is determined, to remain present, to remain relevant in that area and to continue to share the gospel. And that's always very encouraging for us to see, even when people know that their decision to follow Christ can lead to death. It will lead to complete isolation. They still do. They still do choose Christ. And of course, this is a work of Christ in their lives. It's the work of the Holy Spirit in their lives. But it's always amazing to see how people come to Christ despite the cost. Would it be okay if I shared a testimony with you?
I would love if you shared a testimony.
So there's this one lady that we met. Her name is Ayan. She came to faith when she was a teenager. She had visions of the Lord, which she didn't at first know what to do with, didn't understand what was going on, but it wouldn't go away. So eventually she ended up at church and became a believer. She became a follower of Christ. And she is from the Somali tribe, living in the Horn of Africa. And the moment her family found out about it, they threw her out. Again, as a teenager in those societies, it's very, very dangerous for you as a young woman to be by yourself. And she speaks about sleeping in a tree one night and being so scared and thinking, if I was a man, this would be so much easier. And then the next day she went home and she said to her mom, please, can I just sleep one more night in your house? And her mom said, no, you can't. You are dead to me. And eventually she found refuge at the church. Same thing, she went through discipleship, but she testifies that this was some of the loneliest times of her life. She had the hardest difficulty. She cried many, many tears over her family, about the loss of her family, missed them dearly. They wouldn't take her back. They wouldn't accept her. But she just stayed at it. And now, a decade later, she continues to be one of the pillars in the church in that area. She writes hymns. She faces persecution, and she just kept at it, speaking to her family. And today, the relationship has been restored to a great extent because they've witnessed her life. They've seen how she has just persisted in this, and she just kept. And this was not a 2-week kind of thing that was happening to her. She stayed at it even in difficulty, and they even observed how she was persecuted, and then came to her and said, we see that you have been persecuted, and we see that you're in great danger. Please be careful. And now they support her much more. But it took many, many years for her. And she was really exposed there for a very, very long time. But the Lord has been taking care of her. And she's been surrounded by people who have helped her in her fellowship and to grow in the faith, to be able to do that as well.
That's amazing to hear how she's grown, but even taking a decade is, you mentioned right at the top of this that, you know, there's things we can take from the persecuted church. What is this one of those lessons? You know, a decade to see people accept your faith. You know, what other challenges and things do you think that we can take from the persecuted church?
Yeah, there's so much we can learn from the persecuted church. I think one of the things that I've learned is that brokenness is not necessarily a problem, because that's often where the Lord meets people. That's often where he ministers most intensely with people. He walks very closely with people who are broken. And that's beautiful to observe. It's beautiful to see that when people are broken, it leaves space for God to come in and to minister to them in a way that I think we just never maybe see, because we're much more comfortable. We're not maybe as challenged as that. But then, you know, I also realize that when I go through difficulties, I can have the same trust that the Lord would meet me in my difficulties, because I've seen it in the lives of persecuted Christians. I've seen his faithfulness in their lives, even when they're completely broken. Their faith is not destroyed. And that's his work. It's not the individual, I think. It's God. It's God's faithfulness. So, yeah, that really encourages me, and that's why I need it in my life. It's such a reality check on the one hand, because that's the one thing that God promised us. He said, you will be persecuted. He said we will face these difficulties. But he said, take heart, because I've overcome. And I see that. It's such a privilege to see that in people's lives. Maybe it's not immediate, but over time, he brings healing and he brings hope. And people who face persecution are not hopeless. They are surprised by the hope they have even. So it's very exciting.
So then to hear that people aren't hopeless in this situation, that God is faithful and meeting them even in the midst of this darkness and this great challenge, and he'll meet our own needs as well. For us to stand one with them one day of the year, that's a challenge for us, and we want to do that. But why specifically would you encourage people to stand one with them? Or what is it that you hope comes out of the Australian church identifying closer with their brothers and sisters in persecution?
You know, the church in Africa really needs a lot of support. The one danger is, you know, from speaking about the hope is that people think, oh, they don't need the support. And that's not the truth. They need our support. They need us to stand next to them. So I'm really hoping that people will be challenged and that they will embrace the persecuted church and see the need for them to come alongside them, to be able to send an indigenous believer out to sit with someone who has gone through terrible loss, to just sit with them, not say anything, just be there, just be present with them, just sit and listen to their story. And then when the time is right to offer trauma care, when the time is right to offer practical help to them, this is the kind of thing that I really hope that we're getting from this. But then also to embrace them for their own benefit, to learn from the persecuted church, to see how God is at work in other places. This is really about the advancement of the gospel, you know, to learn from them, and also empower them to be able, in their circumstances, give them what they need to continue this good work that they've started in the midst of these difficulties, not running away from the difficulties, but taking it on. They're really on the front lines. They need us. They need us to be there with them.
And over the many years that you've been doing this, can you say with confidence that absolutely the gospel is still going out? Absolutely.
You know, I am really just encouraged to see the numbers of people coming in. There is a massive movement in Africa to Christ. And this is so exciting to see. But as the church grows, persecution will grow as well, because where the gospel is preached, there is persecution. So yeah, the church is growing, and there is this big movement coming to Christ. And we are excited to journey alongside the local church, to be able to take those new believers in, to disciple them properly, to show them what does life with Christ look like. Now that I've left all these things behind, what does it look like to follow Christ? You know, that is very exciting for me to see how our local workers are able to journey with local Christians and empower them to do all sorts of things that they never considered to be possible. So, yeah, that's very, very good.
Joe, that's incredible to hear. And we've run out of time for this segment, but thank you so much for taking time out and joining us here in Sydney. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. Please stay tuned, and Jocelyn and Gabe are going to give you some instructions of how you can respond today in One With Them.
Wow, that was incredible. I really enjoyed listening to all these stories. I just am so inspired by our persecuted brothers and sisters like Aisha and the different stories we heard from Joe. It's just so inspiring to see how they count the cost for their faith. And I think it's such a challenge for us here in Australia to look at what we can do to share our faith in Jesus with the people around us who need to hear the good news.
Yeah. I think it's honestly one of our greatest privileges is to stand shoulder to shoulder with these people. Yeah. They are our brothers and sisters. We are one in the same. We worship the same God. And so one with them matters because it's us just standing with them. So what we are asking you to do is to give one day's wage to the persecuted church. One day out of the next 365, whether you are a teenager who works part-time at KFC, whether you're a business owner, a lawyer, whoever you are, you have the ability to give to this campaign no matter the dollar amount. So we would really love for you to be a part of it. You can head to onewiththem.org. We'll put the link in the comments below. And we'll also chuck a couple of phone numbers in there if you'd rather donate that way. But we would really love for you to be a part of it. That's one part of it. The other part is to draw a cross on your wrist and to share it to your social media as a public declaration of your faith in your solidarity with other people who believe in Jesus. So we'd really love for you to be a part of that.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you what you thought was amazing about this session. Just then put some comments in, and we have a giveaway competition for these beautiful prints. If you leave a comment of why it matters that we stand one with them, with our persecuted brothers and sisters, put a comment in and let us know why you think that matters, and you might win one of these prints. Later at 7 p.m. today, we have another live stream, so make sure you join us again. It's our CEO, Mike Gore, and Carl Faze, who will be talking about blessed are the persecuted and what that means for us today.
Yeah, so we'd really love for you to tune into that at 7 p.m. and we'll see you then. Thanks so much.